Welcome to the second day of our workshop, and today we are going to dive a little bit deeper into the exploration of not only what we do, not only who we work with, but also how we work with them. And we'll also explore some specific methods and applications, and we'll practice. It's going to be a lot of fun. If anyone has any questions, we'll have a little questions and answers session pretty much at the end of our morning as well as at the end of the afternoon part of our training. Did everything sink in nicely, what we worked on yesterday, or did you guys have any questions about it?
Some did. No, I think that I understand it.
Great. All right. So, as I promised, we will look into how we do coaching. We kind of already experienced some of the coaching techniques. If you visited my webinars, you know what I'm talking about in terms of specific methodology. But for the sake of kind of wrapping it together into one cohesive system for you, I will just give you an idea that essentially what we work on is first identifying where the person is at. And obviously we want to find out how satisfied they are with their current state of affairs. We use this wonderful diagram, or more like a pie chart for that gives us an ability to assess how well they're doing in each of the segment of the pie chart, and also how balanced this pie chart is in between the different segments. Then we ask our coaching client to come up with a dream. Basically, what is it that they would like to manifest? I usually ask them about a year ahead, sometimes 2 years ahead, where they would like to be, what they would experience if they actually manifested what they aspire to manifest. So that's the dream state. That's the state of affairs that they would like to experience. Most likely they would have a greater sense of satisfaction. If they don't have it, then their dream is really, it needs some work on it. Then we simply do the similar type of pie chart exercise to assess how balanced the new dream would be. In other words, asking them about levels of satisfaction in regard to each of the segments of the dream. And obviously, there's going to be a distinction or disparity between the current state of affairs as opposed to the dream state. So, we actually make the person recognize that very clearly. If they recognize how big the difference is or discrepancy is between the current state versus the dream state, they will be highly motivated. The more the discrepancy, the more likely the person will be like, yeah, I really want that. That's what we want. We want them to be highly motivated. If the discrepancy is very small, for example, the incremental improvement in regard to, let's say, their health will be from 75 to 77%, well, that means that they either are not dreaming big, or they don't have any hope for improvement, or they have a certain doubt about their own capability of making improvements. So basically they feel like, I don't think I can make things better in my life. It may be a reflection of their inability to be coachable or uncoachability. That's okay if the person expresses that kind of uncoachability or lack of coachability. We can ask them, do you feel like you are the right person for me to work with, because I only work with coachable people. Now, sometimes the person will admit that, yeah, I don't think I'm coachable. and then we just let them go and say goodbye. Sometimes the person will actually be trying to convince you that they are coachable. As a matter of fact, sometimes it becomes a funny situation where they just really insist that they are coachable and they demand that you would work with them. Okay, well, you can acquiesce. If the person really wants to work with you again, maybe they will improve their coachability as they progress. So, in other words, we don't just assume that the person is at the same level of coachability forever. Probably at some point in time, maybe in their childhood or some other time in their life, they were more coachable, meaning more open-minded, or more curious, or even more capable of taking responsibility. Now, usually it's something associated with being more adult, taking responsibility, but again, maybe the person lost some of that responsibility, sense of ability to be responsible for their experiences. And there may also be some ways that we can enhance their coachability. We'll be looking into that today. So we can basically allow the person to talk us into working with them. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up at the very first stage of our exploration of how we coach is because this particular exercise is something that we often do even before we sign up a person for a coaching program. In other words, this is a fantastic opportunity to both assess their coachability, give them the opportunity to connect with their dream, even if they don't experience our coaching. Just that opportunity to connect with their dream is already very beneficial. So sometimes the person doesn't get your coaching, but still will be able to go home and rave about that encounter, because that was amazing. I actually connected with something I never thought I would dream up. Now, one of the things that we also do in our practice is we close the deal. We need to close the conversation prior to enrollment of the person by shifting to an enrollment conversation. Well, this is an excellent enrollment conversation to have. This is where you're at right now. This is where you would like to be. This is like, these are two different islands. How do you get from point A to point B, from island where you're at right now versus island where you want to be? Well, I happen to have a vehicle, a boat, that will transport you from here to there. And as a matter of fact, I have traveled this journey myself. That's one of the reasons why we want to specifically work with people who are on a similar path to your path, because you can legitimately say that I've been there, I've traveled this journey, I can actually help you perform this trip. And so what happens then? You simply say, I would like to be able to help you with this, would you like me to help you with this? And if the person says yes, that's great. We have more sophisticated ways to do closing of this kind of enrollment conversation than just asking them, would you like to? I will get into that a little later in this afternoon. But the idea is that this is a great thing to talk about in the very beginning of an encounter with a person. It doesn't have to be like a first ever encounter, like it may be a friend, it may be a neighbor who eventually says, I see you doing something really cool, or like one of my students or apprentices told me that his neighbor actually stopped him as he was walking across the parking lot in front of his apartment building, and he said, Hans, we've been neighbors for years, and I remember you being a totally different person. You were really timid, and you were kind of like just walking on the edges of the parking lot all the time, and just being, really looked like you were always afraid. and now you're completely confident and just walking through the center of the parking lot and saying goodbye to me, or hello to me or something. What's up? I mean, you just like a different person. And Hans said, well, thank you for that confirmation. This is really nice to hear that. Yeah, I've been studying with Lama Trungpa, so maybe you would like to meet him and experience what he does. So basically, that's how he introduced another student of mine, Rob, to me, who went through some of my coaching, got so empowered, they ended up deciding to go on a round world bicycling trip. Now, I've never traveled around the world in a bicycle, so I did not coach him how to do that. He basically decided to do it on his own. So I don't know where he is now. The last time I heard of him, he was somewhere in Pakistan. Hope he survived that trip. So
Go Hans.
that was Rob.
That was Rob. Oh, Hans.
Hope he's not planning on going directly into India.
Because they don't like
I
bicycles.
wouldn't be surprised if he was.
Because Pakistan and India are not friendly and the border might be, well.
Take a different route.
Right.
Yeah.
Need more coaching.
He's gonna take a roundabout way through Afghanistan.
You're
That's
way
where the,
sweet.
that's where the flow is guided.
Well, the mere fact that it was in Pakistan means that one way or another he got there, and there are only two ways to get there, either through Iran or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Huh.
And there's only one way to go from there, to India. So,
Just check up on.
yeah. So, what we do is essentially we start talking to the person about something that hardly ever anyone talks to them about, their dreams, and also how satisfied they are now and how satisfied they would be when they achieve their dreams. How satisfied they are now? Maybe some people talk to them about it. Usually the conversation degrades very quickly about how dissatisfied they are. You know what I mean? Most people who experience not quite a high level of satisfaction, they will start bitching and moaning about how something is wrong. Well, we're not descending down that path. We want to stay on the high road, so to speak. We want to maintain the focus of attention on exploring different areas of their lives in regard to the level of their satisfaction. And it's very important that it's not black and white. It's like, I'm really happy with it, or I'm totally unhappy. It's much more subtle. On the scale from 1 to 100, how satisfied are you with the current state of affairs in this particular area of your life, for example, health and wellness?
Mm-hmm.
Some people will say, well, I'm kind of in the middle, 50%. That's going to cop out in most cases. But it is possible that somebody is right at the 50%. In most cases, they're just too lazy to assess more precisely.
Mm-hmm.
So we can ask them to take a little bit of time to really play with this idea of gauging their level of satisfaction, because it's going to make it a lot easier for us to work with that person, and it's also going to make it a lot easier for that person to track their own progress. You can only track the progress of that which you can measure. If you cannot measure the progress, there is hardly a way to track it. So we want them to be more precise. That's also the reason why I'm not even asking them to assess it on a scale from 1 to 10, but rather from 1 to 100. Next thing we also want to do is we want to see how balanced the pie chart is and identify the areas of strength and areas of weakness. When the person has a high level of satisfaction in at least one of those areas of life that we explore, and we explore the 6 main ones, as you know. What are those? Who can tell me?
Health, career, finance.
Well, it's the same one. Career and finances, I usually lump them together. But
Well, I can see one. Okay.
Hobbies,
uh-huh,
relationships,
uh-huh.
spiritual development, friends.
Not relationships.
Is that same thing as relationship?
It's different. So
One is
family,
love and the other one is.
family versus friends. So it's family or intimate relationships or
Social.
and social relationships or social contributions are also called contributions because often we're talking about not only just how we relate to friends, but also what kind of contribution I would like to make to my society or my community or my. Huh?
Nothing.
So, especially it applies to people who are a little bit higher on the pyramid of needs of Abraham Maslow, like we talked about yesterday. If a person is at the very low rung of the pyramid, they may not be even concerned with the social contribution. But once they already have the roof over their head, they already have relatively established career, or they have family that they can take care of, they may start thinking about social contributions. Sometimes they even start thinking about social contributions before they actually developed a solid foundation. In that case, it's hard to actually contribute to society because the foundation is still flimsy. So if the person has high aspirations, in that case, I would actually ask them to come back down to the ground, so to speak, down to earth, and see how they can establish the foundation more solidly, and then start working on social contributions. But it doesn't mean that they cannot dream about it, and it doesn't mean that they can be dissatisfied with their level of social contribution. So we still include it in the pie chart. And also personal and spiritual development is another important slice. Some people forget about it for some reason. Even when we ask them about their values, they sometimes forget about the values associated with spirituality. So apparently some people are not particularly spiritual oriented. Fine, at least they may be oriented towards personal development. Now, some people lump them together, some people actually separate them and say, well, for me personal development is not the same as my spirituality. Usually those are people who confuse spirituality for religion. In other words, they go to church and they think that they're spiritual because of that. And some of them are actually like, spiritual leaders. I've met plenty of monks and priests and ministers of various sorts. They think that they're spiritual people just because they're preaching. Well, apparently preaching and being spiritual is not always the same thing. Being religious and being spiritual sometimes is not the same thing. However, we can include religious development as long as we're talking about spiritual development at the same time into this pie chart, just because it's part of their life. So for example, if a person says, I want to be one with God, and what would that mean to you? Well, I would be like walking in Jesus Christ's shoes or something like that. Fine. Power to you. I'm not going to criticize them. I'm not going to say this is not the right kind of spirituality. That's fine. However, what's interesting is that they may experience some degree of dissatisfaction in that arena, and we can help them experience greater degree of satisfaction. I've worked with people who practice various types of religious and philosophical beliefs, and I can help them. Doesn't matter that they practice something different from what I practice. I don't have to indoctrinate them or convert them into my spirituality. Not at all. As a matter of fact, if I started converting them, that would just easily degrade my coaching because I'm no longer asking them questions. I'm start imposing some beliefs on them. You know what I mean? So, well, let's not do that. We don't even do what we think. We don't even impose ideas, for example, about health and telling people, oh, you are eating wrong. You need to be eating like this. We don't even impose ideas about, let's say, sports or hobbies. Oh, you're not doing your sports right. You should be doing it this way because that's a better way to go. You simply ask them questions. How's it working out for you? You're satisfied at this level and you want to be at a higher level of satisfaction. Well, let's find out how you can actually do that. And through this exploration, we want them to reinvent the wheel and to, with our help, to discover that there is a better way to achieve satisfaction. So basically, it's kind of a really subtle, but seems to be a more effective way to help the person develop along a certain particular developmental path. Now, what happens when we don't tell people how to get from point A to point B? We just ask them, would you like to get from here to there? They say, yeah, but I don't know how to. Well, that's usually when we start closing that conversation by simply saying, well, I happen to know how to. As a matter of fact, I've been traveling down this path myself, and I'll be happy to coach you. But we don't just close like that. We have another really interesting practice that we integrate.
Bless you.
Now, some of my apprentices asked me in the past, is this where you introduced the practice of harmonizing polarities? I said, no, I don't. Because they will actually smash these two energies together, create a unified energy field, and they will be like, cool, I'm living my dream now. Who needs coaching anymore? It doesn't mean that it's a bad practice. It's a great practice, and we will work on this practice with our coaching clients. We just don't do this practice before they sign up to study to receive coaching with us, because they will lose motivation. We don't want them to lose motivation. We want them to be chomping at the bit to work with us. So we don't introduce harmonizing polarity practice at this point. We have something else, a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more strategic, and that is timeline. Remember? Drawing the timeline, and we literally ask them to draw the timeline, and one end of the timeline would be associated with the current state of affairs. It doesn't matter from which side you go, from right to left or from left to right. Different cultures in the world write in different directions. The Japanese and Chinese, for example, write from right to left, so do Arabs and Iranians. Others write from left to right. So whichever side is associated with current state of affairs doesn't really matter. The opposite side of the timeline would be associated with a dream state where they were just exploring and identifying how satisfied they would be with the dream state of affairs. And then, if this is a timeline about 1 year length, we ask them to divide it in half. We literally explain to them that for many people, it seems daunting to figure out how to get from here to there in the course of just 1 year. However, I know how to make it very pragmatic and effective. Let's just divide it in half. In a sense, it's like a reversal, like a flipped upside down Zeno paradox. Are you familiar with the Greek mathematician Zeno?
Is it XENO or?
Correct.
Okay.
XENO. Yeah, Zeno basically came up with a paradox when he said that if you go from here to there, you'll never reach the destination.
Oh, that's the one that's infinitely.
Because when you cover half of this distance, in a certain amount of time, you still have another half of the distance to cover. And when you cover half of that distance and half of the time, you still have another half of it. And so you get closer and closer, but you actually still have half the distance, some distance to divide in half and cover that. And so basically, it was his paradox that you basically can never reach the destination. What I did is I just flipped it upside down. I said, you know what? Let's not go to the destination, dividing this journey in halves over and over again. Let's divide it in a big half first, and then we go closer to the present moment. So, what we're gonna do first is divide it in half. So for example, if it's a year-long span of time, we start looking at 6 months. Where would you need to be in 6 months? And you can write down these questions if you haven't written them down yet. Where would you need to be in 6 months from today? So that in 6 more months, you would be able to achieve your dream, and you would feel like you're on the right track. So where would you need to be in 6 months so that you would feel like you're on the right track to achieve your dream and manifest your dream in 6 more months? That's a really simple question, but it actually will inspire the person to start thinking about something that people often don't think about. They often start thinking about what should I start with now so that I get there in the year. And thinking about what the steps need to be right now without this kind of strategic planning sometimes is really difficult because there are so many options, there are so many steps that I can take. But which ones should I choose? But when we actually go backwards, it makes it a lot easier and much more concrete. So we ask them to describe where they would be and what they would be doing at that point in time. Not only where they would be, but also what they would be doing and how they would need to be. In other words, we're asking them not only the doing question, but also being question. Ontological questions like this about the state of being are also very unusual. People don't really talk about this type of things usually, even with their best friends. How would you need to be in order to feel like you're on the right track? And in 6 more months, you can manifest your dream. Obviously, there's going to be some difference between the way of being associated with that moment on timeline as compared to the current state of affairs. We will use that in our coaching methodology. Right now, we're not even working with energy directly, we're just working on creating a game plan, so to speak. But we can come back to this timeline over and over again over the course of our coaching program and identify particular ways of being that would be associated with that particular juncture along the way. If a person is curious about what does this have to do with Qigong or what does it have to do with energy, you can say, well, actually, I'm curious what kind of energy would be associated with that way of being that you would need to be in at 6 months point in time. So basically, if you can imagine being able to see yourself from the fly on the wall perspective, what would energy be like that is associated with that juncture on your journey? But most people don't ask these kind of questions just because they don't really think in terms of energy very often.
Well, since people aren't usually asked that kind of question, what if they don't initially have any idea how to even answer it?
Well, that's why they ask questions, because they don't know how to answer it.
No, I mean, we ask them the idea of what kind of energy would they need to have. They've never even considered that perspective before, so they have no answer to give us. How do we coach them along that?
That's why I said we usually don't go into the energy exploration in the very beginning of coaching, because this is a conversation that is happening basically even before you start a coaching program. If you start the coaching program and go through it for a few weeks or maybe a month, you already start developing some degree of energy awareness, because we start exploring what kind of energy do you have now, for example, from a point of view of flying a wall. How would you describe your current energy state? And often people would be first flustered, not being able to say anything about it. So we can even put them in a slightly hypnotic trance, or just simply help them relax, do a little meditation. And then again, and ask him about the quality of energy. It may not be the visual quality, for example, colors. It may be some texture. For example, some person may feel like my energy is really rough around the edges, or some person may say it feels heavy. Okay, so this is more kinesthetic kind of experience. Some people may say my energy smells one way or another. Okay, fine, what kind of smell is that? So no judgment, just simply olfactory sense. Some people may say it moves really rapidly in one direction or another, maybe hesitant, or maybe it's flowing or something else. So basically, we observe energy in a variety of different ways depending on our predilection of whether we're auditory or visual or kinesthetic or otherwise. And we don't expect or don't assume that our clients will have just one mode of perception. We allow them to use whatever mode is available to them, whatever they may be more connected with. And they may also develop others as well. But like I said, in the beginning stage of the conversation about just establishing the coaching program, I would usually not even go there. So this is if a person is asking you what does it have to do with energy, you can give them a little taste of it. Normally I would save it for a future session.
Yeah, because that would be like if in 6 months they see themselves, you know, maybe marketing more, and maybe they have a really rough time marketing for whatever reason. And so this might come in a future session around, well, what is your energy, what is your quality, coming up with thoughts, values, and beliefs around, say, their experience marketing. You know, are you meeting people face to face? Are you doing it online? And then having them feel for themselves in that realm, which would actually be more like social in a sense, right? Which could just unlock so much just in that, both intra and extra.
And in that case, it could be auditory experience of energy, because marketing mostly consists of either speaking words or typing words.
Right. Sometimes. Some people market by showing up. Some people actually just by their physical presence, and
but most
just don't block it. There's
but in most cases, when they show up, they still give a business card, or they still have some kind of a way to identify. Okay, this person is not just showing up to show up; they actually have some kind of a marketing message, and the message is auditory.
But this could be that. Then this could come into something like that. Like, so what is the quality of your energy now?
Absolutely. And
then dreaming into whatever your marketing menu is for yourself that you see in 6 years that help you maybe in your dream state achieve some goal.
Especially if the person is coming to you because they're unsatisfied with their current state of affairs in the business realm, and they want to achieve greater success at it. Obviously, marketing can be an important step in that direction. Then we can also ask them the question, what would you need to be doing? And
if you're not doing that, how would you need to be, or what energy would you source, or whatever, right? So that's where this would come in.
Yes.
Because
Yes, so what you need to be doing is so that in 6 more months you achieve what you aspire to achieve. Is a very important question. So we want to kind of balance the ontological questions about being with more action-oriented questions about doing. Some people are in the mode of having. They just want to have some stuff. Okay. Well, for example, if the person says, I want to have a Ferrari, using the example from yesterday. And a year from now, I really need to have a Ferrari. Okay. What do you need to be doing, and how do you need to be in 6 months from now? Is there anything that you need to have in 6 months from now so that it would help you get your Ferrari in 6 more months? Maybe it's money, maybe it's something else. In other words, there's going to be some degree of progression. Now, we don't stop at 6 month point. We chunk it down further, or closer, rather, to the present time. For example, the next stage would be to ask them, how about 3 months from now? where do you need to be in 3 months from today, so that in 3 more months, you would be at this point and at the point in your journey that you just described to me. What do you need to be doing at 3-month point in time, so that you would feel like you're on the right track and moving in the right direction? Is there anything that you need to have in 3 months from today that would help you achieve what you aspire to achieve? And most importantly, how do you need to be in 3 months from today that would allow you to manifest your dream? These kind of questions become easy to remember once you get into the flow of things. They just roll off of your tongue. The first time you ask these kind of questions, it may be a little clunky or not familiar, but practice makes perfect. In other words, the conversations based on questioning rather than telling the person is what distinguishes the coaching conversations from all other conversations that we can think of. Next.
This is something that we're doing before we get them as a client, right?
Yes. So, and you will see why.
Mm-hmm.
You will see why in just a minute.
And I guess my question was, the common response to my question one was, it would be a good idea to introduce visualization techniques, but if we're not even client, if it's not a client yet, it's not a good time to introduce visualization techniques.
Right.
But the other part is, and something from personal experience, and I'm going on the psychological side of things, but I think it affects, right, like all these questions. Like for me, for example, like whenever you ask me, or years ago, you would ask me, where do you see yourself in 6 months, or where do you see yourself? Like I couldn't, see myself in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you ask me, like, how does it feel? Like, well, I don't know how it feels, because I was never in touch with my feelings to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that now, all through the years, I'm starting to put together feelings with mine. But before, I didn't even know, like, how I was feeling at the moment. I was like, how are you feeling right now? I don't know, I just feel something here, but I cannot mentally put a name to that feeling. So how can I answer these questions when somebody asks me, like, well, how does it feel, to see yourself? I'm like, I don't know, before 3 years ago, 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to express how I felt.
Well, that's a very good question. And also, did you guys hear me say anything about feeling?
Oh gosh. You
I didn't
actually
say
just
anything
said
about feeling.
doing, being, and having.
How
How
would you need to
satisfied
feel?
would you
And how do you need to be? Okay, go ahead and read it.
be?
I guess on one of them, what kind of energy do you need to feel or to have to feel like you're on the right track?
Yeah. So
You feel you have. Oh, I see what you got.
that's why we
That's
usually
cool.
reserve this kind of questions for later coaching sessions. When the person actually starts learning how to feel energy, usually we don't go there in the beginning conversation, just when we're talking about enrollment into the coaching program. And I usually don't assume that the person would be connected with their feelings. I don't want to assume that the people will even have clarity about their dreams. That's why we talk first about the current state of affairs. And that helps them establish certain framework, how they think about things. So how is my health and wellness? I don't know how my health and wellness is. Well, do you feel well? Are there any aches and pains? Do you feel energetic, or maybe you feel tired all the time? Do you get enough rest? Do you feel like your health is improving or deteriorating over time? How satisfied are you with that? That basically gives the person a little bit of a easier time conceptualizing what their health and wellness is like right now.
Mm.
Then we go into career and finances. How satisfied are you with your career and finances? For some people, these are two different things. Like you said, Nancy, career may be different from finances. Why? Maybe because the person inherited a bunch of money, for example.
Right.
Or they're a trust fund baby. They have a bunch of money, they don't need to worry about the finances, but they still want to develop a career.
Yeah.
Like, for example, they want to be
Work in the world, sense of purpose, something, whatever.
Right, exactly. So I don't want to say that it's always identical. That's why sometimes I even say, look, maybe we can divide it instead of 6, maybe we can divide it in 12
Mhm.
sections.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
health, distinct from wellness.
Mhm.
Career,
Exactly.
distinct from finances. Hobbies, distinct from sports. But usually we can lump them together, hobbies and sports.
Yeah, but
We
you've
can
got the artist and finances. A lot of times you get people who are the starving artists.
Mm.
But that's their passion, that's their expression, that's what gives them that joie de vivre or whatever, and that's
Mhm.
their friends or community, and but it doesn't bring in the money. So then they're like, okay, but the money piece to pay bills or
Yeah, how
live off the
satisfying.
grid or yeah, all that. It's like
And there's bringing in
so.
money and keeping it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that doctor with
Oh,
one hell of a career who's broke.
sure, yeah, there's that interesting
Yeah, totally.
ebb and flow of
Yeah.
energy.
Absolutely. So all of this can be a part of the conversation. If a person, for example, is a professional athlete,
Mm-hmm.
for them, hobbies and sports will be kind of linked together with career and finances.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We can talk about basically using that as one category instead of two separate ones.
What would be?
Or we can actually talk about separately, well, how is your
Thank you.
athletic career going as opposed to how your finance is doing? Like you said, you may be $1 million earner, football player or basketball player, and you still may be broke, or you may be doing really well financially, but you feel dissatisfied with how your game is going. So it can be actually two distinct things.
What would be like the spiritual versus like what would how would you separate? Oh, it's like spiritual versus religion or spiritual versus or community or is that spiritual social?
Personal development and spiritual development,
Got it.
I usually lump those together.
Okay, but that could also be sometimes.
It can be, like I said, people who believe that spirituality is mostly religion, or they don't separate the religion and spirituality at all.
Got it.
They often consider that personal development is one thing and their spiritual development is a different thing.
I thought of something that you could say to help convince people of this methodology, because biologically speaking, it makes a lot of sense why people would have difficulty articulating these things, because the limbic brain, which is responsible for emotions and feelings and that kind of side, has no capacity for language.
Mm-hmm.
And the neocortex, which does have capacity for language, has no capacity for feelings. And so a lot of people have trouble having their neocortex and limbic communicate with one another. And so you could say these exercises are helping to bridge that pathway.
That's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. That also may work with people who understand at least the existence of limbic versus neocortex versus other parts of the brain. Again, if people are familiar with the brain structures, they will understand that. If they're not familiar with the anatomy of the brain, it will go over their head.
But it don't sound good enough,
Yeah.
that's what people like.
Well, the reason why I bring
Yeah,
that up
but it
is
sounds like you know what you mean.
Yeah, the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people who are scientifically, academically minded feel antagonistic almost towards energetic and spiritual ideas. And so by explaining this, it can help to marry those two ideas and make it acceptable to them.
I like that. Yeah. Okay. That is a very nice way to put it. And also, for people who are not even familiar with the anatomy of the brain, what Eduardo was talking about just a couple minutes ago, that basically the feelings he was identifying with the heart
Exactly.
or the bodily sensations as opposed to mental thoughts would be in the head.
Mm-hmm.
So it may not be a separation between different parts of the brain and maybe different parts of the body. Same idea.
Yeah, I would explain that feeling is the disconnection between those parts of the brain, like expressed physically. And so you could also use that to like tie those ideas to someone who may not even be familiar with those ideas.
Yeah, very good.
Excuse me for a moment.
Actually, me too. Can we do a potty break?
You want a potty break?
Yeah.
All right.
I was just thinking
Well,
about
let's
it,
take a
and
potty
it's
break.
nice, so I'm gonna go.